Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Fons Trompenaars, a globally renowned Dutch organizational theorist and founder of Trompenaars Hampden-Turner, a premium consultancy in intercultural management, as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. With decades of experience, Dr. Fons is globally recognized as a consultant, trainer, motivational speaker, and author, shaping the way businesses navigate cultural diversity. Dr. Fons earned his MA in economics from Wei University, Amsterdam in 1979 and later completed his PhD at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania in 1983, focusing on the interplay between organizational meaning and culture. A pioneer in the field, Dr. Fons has dedicated over 30 years to helping Fortune 500 companies enhance global effectiveness by addressing leadership, innovation, globalization, and cultural dilemmas. His expertise lies in reconciling differences, whether ethnic, generational, gender-based, or professional, to drive business success. His influential book, Riding the Waves of Culture, Understanding Cultural Diversity in Businesses, has been recognized as one of the top 10 management classics by Thinkers 50, and the World Federation of People Management Associations honored him with the prestigious George Pettipas Award in recognition of his lasting impact on management thinking. Beyond consulting, Dr. Fons is actively involved in academia, serving as a co-director at the Servant Leadership Center for Research and Education at Vrij University, Amsterdam. His work continues to bridge cultural gaps and transform international business strategies. In this episode, Dr. Fons will share key insights from his globally acclaimed book, Riding the Waves of Culture. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Fons Trompenaars to the podcast. Dr. Fons Trompenaars, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Deepak, the same for me joining with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Fons, your book defines culture as the way in which a group of people solves problems and reconciles dilemmas. Could you elaborate on this definition and how it applies to the modern business world?
Sure, Deepak. The idea of culture is it's multi-layered. On the outside, you have the expression of culture, which Ed Schein calls explicit culture. It's our behavior. It's the way we show our values. The deeper layer are the values and the norms. And when the value becomes a norm, it, as Ed Schein says so beautifully, it slips out of consciousness and becomes a basic assumption. Now, you might say, these behaviors on the outside, how are they established? And you will see that behaviors are forced upon nature of the human beings because they want to survive. Let me give you an example. The Dutch love consensus. We love to involve people in decision making. That is a behavior that reflects a value called consensus. Where is it coming from? It's because we had to fight water. As you know, the Dutch, a bit like Bangladesh, are continuously in fight with water. And you can only fight water if you do it together. So the point is that culture, our behaviors, our values are developed in a process of survival, in challenging with the outside world, and not the opposite. I mean, the Dutch didn't start with consensus and said, hey, let's look for water. No, we had to fight water and therefore consensus. Another example, the Americans are very legalistic, many lawyers per capita. Why? Now, because part of the legal framework and signing contracts is because you don't trust people. And if you don't trust people, you need lawyers. Now, why do Americans don't trust people? Because they were always on the run. The amount of years they have friends, colleagues at work, is much, much lower than, let's take the other extreme, Japan. There are 25 times less lawyers in Japan compared to America. Now, is that blaming America? No, it is just solving problems. Now, that's a long explanation of an important issue, because if I link it to business, you know the famous expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But I add, but strategy eats culture for lunch. So let's have dinner together. And I'm saying that because strategy is about solving problems, finding opportunities, right? And that is supported by a culture. And very often not the other way around. So I'm not against strategy, although I'm coming from culture, but it's the yin and yang between culture and strategy. Culture is a way we support the strategy.
The book introduces key cultural dimensions such as universalism versus particularism and individualism versus collectivism. How can leaders effectively navigate these dimensions in an international business context?
Okay, these are two examples of two dimensions in a series of 7. But if we take universalism, particularism, let us get a bit away from the academic terms. Are you more rule-driven, which we call universalism, or are we more for exceptions and flexibility, which is more particularism? Now, in business, that manifests, for example, do we need to standardize globally, or do we need to be flexible close to the customer locally? That is one of the most frequently mentioned dilemmas in business, especially in the clients we serve, because that's very often about cultural differences. Now, you will see that there is a tendency for Americans, more universalistic, Northwest Europe, to go for standardization. While if you are in the Latin world or in India, it is more about be flexible, particularism. Now, if you are international, you have to reconcile the two. And a good leader is shown by how he or she reconciles the opposites. And the reconciliation of the global company versus the local company or the multi-local company is what we call the transnational firm. And the transnational firm has 4 characters, more. By the way, Ghoshal and Bartlett, Ghoshal, famous, unfortunately, he passed away 10 years ago, Sumantra Ghoshal, said that the transnational firm has, first of all, a set of values. They are value driven. I have added to it, but the values need to be dualities. Instead of saying we believe in collaboration, we say no, we strive for collaborative teams that nurture individual excellence. We give people direct feedback with diplomacy. That's one characteristic of the transnational firm. The second one, it's polycentric. There is not one main center that dictates everything. Thirdly, it is an organization with a culture where there is a keen interest to learn locally, take the best practices, which you then globalize. And finally, it has a shared philosophy of leadership, and we believe in servant leadership. Now, that is what managers face from a cultural perspective. The American standardization, let's say people in India more localization. Can we combine it? And you have the transnational firm. Now, what is cultural about this is that the dilemma is shared, but the starting point from America is global. Hey, our problem is local. And from India, it is local. Oh, by the way, how can we standardize this, right? The other dimension, individual collective, is, and I don't think it needs a lot of explanation. The English language is the only language where I is written with a capital letter and you with a small y, right? And I'm, be careful because India is a bad example. Many of you speak English, but it's not your native language, yeah. But if we take in Dutch, you, but more like the respectful you, like in French vous, or in Spanish usted, is with a capital U, and ik, I, with a small I. Now that gives a bit an idea of how important I is versus we. Do you start with your first name? Peter Johnson, call me Peter. Peter is I, Johnson is we. Okay? While in Japan, it's the opposite, right? You start with the family name and then your first name. Okay? Now, let me give you an example of what managers face. So if you have a reward system discussion, in America they say, no, let's have an individual bonus. In Japan they say, what about the team bonus? In Europe they say, how can we avoid taxes? Yeah. Now, if you have a multicultural team, you need another mentality. You need another mindset. So I remember in Shell there was, and I worked with Shell for 8 years in the beginning of my career. In Shell there was a joint venture with the Japanese and let's say Northwest Europeans, Americans in a research site. And the project leader was a Dutch guy. He came to me, he says, Fons, you did something about culture, but I think the Japanese are demotivated. So we interviewed them, cutting a long story short, everything was focused on the individual. The bonus, rank order, the performance. So we said what to do. Now, if you go to the team, you demotivate the Americans. So what do? And I thought the solution we found was very effective. We said 5% of the variable pay will go, in total it was 10%. So 50% of the variable pay, 5%, will go to the individual under one criterion: who's the best team player? And the other 50% will go to teams. And teams had to show what they did to nurture individual excellence. Now that is called co-opetition. You individually compete to better cooperate, and you cooperate to have individuals better compete. And that's what good families do. In the world, every parent will say, how can we raise our children so that they are autonomous when they're 18, let's say, right? And at the same time, how can we motivate our children to be good family members? Now, okay, the Americans might start with autonomy and worry about family. And in India, it is family and you worry about individual autonomy, right? But the dilemma is the same. Now, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Dr. Fons. Dr. Fons, you discussed the role of cultural differences in mergers and acquisitions deals. Can you share an example where cultural misalignment lead to failure and how companies can avoid such pitfalls?
What a nice question. I would rather say, can you give examples where it worked? Because that's much more limited than the failure, although it's getting better. Now, in our approach with mergers and acquisitions, we don't start with culture. We start with, what are your strategic dilemmas? In other words, why did you buy this company? And it's very often not about culture. It's about, oh, they have more innovation. Oh, they are more international, whatever. And what you often see is that the buying company, the dominant company, says, how can we make them the same as us? So that in a year's time we can say, why the hell did we buy them? It's not working. If you start with business dilemmas, for example, you are a pharmaceutical firm and you run out of innovation. So you go to Denmark, where there are small little companies with an enormous innovative outlook. There are two ways of dealing with it. It is buying them and say, we run the X way so that all the innovation will disappear and the best people will leave. That's very often happening. No, what we say, let's work on the strategic dilemmas. Let me give you an example. On the one hand, we want rigor, consistency in our processes, let's say in our research. On the other hand, we want to experiment and be innovative. Now, what we do is we have a dilemma workshop with the top management, and we work on those dilemmas with the question, what can we do with rigor that makes our company more innovative? And what can we do with innovation that increases the standards that we want to impose on people? And then you get the metaphor is the sandbox. We are rigorous about the border of the sandbox, which gives more freedom to the individual in the sandbox, right? Now, then you say, what values and what behavior do we need to develop in order to reconcile this dilemma? And you see strategy and culture comes together. And what is most beautiful, even if you don't reconcile it, you have a dialogue with the people that helps them to learn about each other, to learn about the beauty of standardization, to learn about the beauty of experimentation, right? And then if you can then say, what values and behavior do we need to develop to nurture that reconciliation, you're in great shape. And that's what great mergers and acquisitions do.
A core theme in your work is reconciling cultural dilemmas rather than choosing one side. How can leaders develop this skill and apply it in practical decision making?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, although it's a great question. But, is it nature or nurture? But let me give you some examples. Servant leadership is about distinguishing a problem from a dilemma. And I think the only choice you need to make as a leader is this a problem or a dilemma? If it's a dilemma, the worst you can do is make choices. Because a dilemma is a fight between two things you want. And if you choose, you lose the other side. So that is generic. Now, I believe in training people to think that way and remind them what the training was about. For example, I'll give you examples in a second, in HR policies. The French say frapper toujours. Remind people by different things. So, for example, servant leadership is about this. Yeah, serving and leading is a meta dilemma, which reconciles or help you reconcile standardization and customization, reconciles the individual with the team, right? But how can you make people be reminded that that's important to do? And an example I can give you was at the time, Motorola, the top maker of mobile phones before Nokia, had a wonderful servant leader at the top. He introduced let's call it a paradigm, a philosophy of leadership. And it was not servant leadership, but it had another word. So he introduced a motivational system, and it was called individual dignity entitlement. You can look it up at Google. And there were 6 questions asked. Every quarter, boss, subordinate. And the boss was asking the question, hey, Deepak, is the work you're doing for Motorola meaningful to you? And the answer is yes or no. Yes, you go to the next question. So you could be done in 5 minutes. However, if it's a no, let me give you an example. Second question, are you having enough resources to do your task properly? Yes or no? No. Then it was the responsibility of the boss to make it a yes. The next quarter. Now, that is something that stimulates servant leadership. And it stimulates the dilemma between you as a boss responsible for the resources and the subordinate not having it. And so you have a dialogue with your, hey, how can we solve this problem? And blah, 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 right? So that is an example how you, by having a culture that forces every boss to be a servant leader, to remind them of them. Now, another thing is Jack Walsh at General Electric said the basic dilemma that we have in the company is living our values and performance. He says there are 4 types. Those who live the values and perform, we give them a bonus, a tap on the shoulder. Great. Easy are those who don't do either of them. We fire them. 10% every year. The tricky ones are those who live the values but don't perform, and those who perform and don't live the value. For the latter category, those who perform and don't live the values, we give them a warning. Only one. For those who live the values but don't perform, we give them support. Now, that dilemma is stimulated by how can we have people reconcile it? And Jack Welch said, people who live our values in the long term, so it also reconciles the short and the long term, will perform at the end. And if they need support, they get it. Those who do the opposite, we don't want them. Now, the point I'm trying to make, in HR, you can do a lot of unconscious guidance in people thinking about, oh, it's not only values, it's not only performance, it's combining them, right? And you remember the bonus system in rewards, it's not only individual, it's not only team, it is how to combine them. Now, that's one, and you can train it. We do a lot of trainings on how to reconcile dilemmas, supported by e-learning and what have you. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Dr. Fons.
Contextualizing and training.
Yes. Dr. Fons, over the decades, globalization has moved the world toward a more interconnected business environment. Do you see cultures converging, or are deep-seated cultural differences still shaping business interactions?
Yeah, we have done research on this longitudinal, because we are doing this research for the last 40 years now. In fact, it was just an extension of my PhD that was done in '83, so it's 42 years ago. My God, yeah. Anyway, it is quite interesting to see that over the years there are movements where cultures get together, and there are movements they separate. So the normal distributions, Europe is a good example. You see, there was a moment that Europeans got closer together, and then suddenly they realized, oh, at the English, Brexit, so, oh, we are needing autonomy, we're part of an island, you know what I mean. So you can't say there is just a narrowing of cultural, yeah, on the surface. If we take this onion model, on the outside behaviors, they look more the same. We are all on TikTok, we are all on Instagram, we're all on blah, blah, blah. Yeah, LinkedIn, as we very well know. But that's the surface, right? It's the behavior that looks standardized. But deeper in it, there is still the conviction that you need to call me Dr. Fons or Dr. Trompenaars, while we in the Netherlands say, oh, cut the crap with all these titles, you know. But no, you are Deepak. By the way, I respect that, and it's a good feeling. But what I'm saying, on LinkedIn, we just talk to each other with a similar language, but deep inside, there are still the conviction, and that goes much slower. Plus, I don't think human beings want to be the same. You know, the beauty of diversity, let's keep it, because it leads to innovation. But you know, there are moments of compression and there are moments of diversion. And it's the same with organizations. That different disciplines, when they need to work together, you know you need to be speaking the same language, but you also realize that marketing people and salespeople are quite different from manufacturing or R&D people, right? So both are going on at the same time.
How does culture impact innovation in organizations? And what strategies can companies use to foster a globally inclusive innovation mindset?
Beautiful question. Now, first of all, innovation, in essence, is combining values that you never thought could be combined, therefore scarce, therefore profitable, right? So if you take Apple, what has Apple combined that makes it an innovative company? They have combined functionality with aesthetics, right? And it's not easy because the mindset of a designer is quite different from the mindset of an engineer coming with an innovative breakthrough. But every engineer at Apple says, yes, it works, but can we make it beautiful? And every designer says, yes, it's beautiful, but does it have a function? So if you take the glass plate of an iPad, you can swipe it, not breaking your nails. Now, having no frame makes it beautiful, but it also has a function. Okay. Formula One, the big dilemma is speed and safety, but the mindset of increasing the speed in the engine is quite a different mindset from let's make it safe. Every engineer in Formula One says, how can we use the speed to make the car more safe? And aerodynamics is the reconciliation between the two, right? More downforce, the faster you go. Now, so these different values, these different mindset are cultural differences. So for innovation, you need to integrate them. And now we discussed that before, there are ways of doing that. And I think sharing values that are expressed as dualities is a good beginning. So if you have a shared purpose, which is a mosaic of dualities, and you say, we improve the quality of mankind's life by making functionality beautiful. Yeah. Or we make our car safe by giving it more engine power, right? You say, oh, wow. It invites people to be innovative. And you do both at the same time, because every value disconnected from its opposite leads to a pathology, and you need both sides.
With the rise of remote and hybrid teams, what are some cultural challenges that organizations face, and how can they build high-performing teams across different cultures?
Deepak, you're doing good with these questions. You touch upon important points. On this one, I would say the big dilemma is high tech, high touch. There's nothing that can replace physical being there, right? And so my advice to hybrid teams is sometimes meet. You will see that once you have met a person, you read the emails differently. You look at the face differently, etc. Right? Now, you have seen in Corona times that, and our company is part of that. It depends a bit on the type of work, but we just published a book on new approaches to work, where we say, hey, there is a depending on the type of work, always a right balance. Although I don't like the word balance because it assumes if one goes up, the other goes down. We work 4 days from home. I'm at home now, right? But one day we meet. I know other companies do it 2 or 3 days. But you enjoy working at home even more once you have a day of office behind you. And it's lovely to have the day at the office if you work from home. It's the contrast. It's a bit like, and don't mix up the metaphor, but vacation and work. Vacation is so much more fun if you have worked hard, right? It's the contrast. You love the day because there is a night, yeah? And that contrast is also true in hybrid work. So make sure people meet at times. It doesn't have to be a lot of times, so that they know they have touched each other, had a drink with each other, or whatever, right? Another thing is to find out in the type of work you do what can be done better digitally and what can be better done face to face. So, and Deepak, this is the first time I publish it, but we insist now with our clients to use AI during our keynotes. And it is amazing. So I speak like here, blah, 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 blah. We ask some questions in the audience, which are transcribed, put in AI, and I give feedback on what people are saying. It's so powerful. So again, I'm there in a room, analog, but I use AI to enhance what I said in the analog way. And I need the analog to get the data for the AI. In other words, the blended approach, the hybrid approach, if you like, is very powerful. But don't forget one side of them. Don't do everything digitally and don't do everything analog in an analog way.
Dr. Fons, as AI and automation reshape the workplace, how can leaders ensure that cultural intelligence remains a priority in decision making and organizational strategy?
Now, may I come back to a point I made earlier? Start with business issues, reframe them as dilemmas, and we therefore have a 4R approach. First one, recognition of your business issues and perhaps some cultural issues, fine. Then respect them by reformulating your challenges as dilemmas. With dilemmas, it's a dilemma if you respect both sides. Then the third R is reconcile those dilemmas. And then the action points, you go into the values and behavior. But don't stick on values only. Go to values to behavior. We have a methodology that translates values into behaviors. Now, you see, you start with strategy, dilemmas, reconciliation, culture. And I think that's the way to go.
Dr. Fons, my last question. The latest edition of your book delves deeper into diversity, ethnicity, and organizational culture. How can businesses go beyond compliance to create truly inclusive and culturally competent workplaces?
I think the key of that is in leadership. I think it is so important to go into servant leadership. And servant leadership, by the way, Gandhi is often mentioned as a great example. So is Mandela, Mother Teresa. They are servant leaders. They're not weak people. They're very strong people, right? But their strength is shown in different ways than only shouting, right? The definition for me, built on Greenleaf's idea, is that servant leadership is enabling others to perform better. And that means sometimes, like a good father or a good mother, that you're tough like a nail. And sometimes you hug them, right? It's that combination. So it's not a weak person, the servant leader. If I see what happens in the world with dictators popping up everywhere, it's not the way to go. It's short-term stupidity. Yeah. Now, be careful, because if you look at lists of what a servant leader is, they listen, with talking. They are long-term, with short-term results. So they manage dualities. And perhaps manage is not the right word, but they combine dualities. So is it trainable? Yes, it is. It is trainable by, again, contextualizing and just practicing dilemma reconciliation and what have you. So that would be my first hint to how can we create a culture that is high performing and sustainable.
Listeners, Dr. Fons Trompenaars' insights have illuminated the critical role of cultural intelligence in today's interconnected business world. His vast experience in advising global organizations, reconciling cultural dilemmas, and fostering servant leadership excellence has offered us invaluable perspectives on navigating cultural diversity in a business. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Fons Trompenaars for joining us and for his dedication to advancing intercultural management. It has been an honor to have you on Business Talk, Dr. Fons.
A great pleasure, Deepak. It was a pleasure, and congratulations with wonderful questions.
Thank you.